Beria. Part 3. Today, we begin the third part of our investigation into Lavrentiy Beria. In the first chapter, we walked through his biography, step by step, from his youth in Tiflis to the peak of his power in Moscow. We saw how he became the man who ruled through fear across an entire nation. In the second chapter, we examined the accusations that emerged after his arrest. We separated documents from rumors, myths from facts, and we discovered that the image of a monster was shaped not only by investigative materials, but also by political interests. Today comes the hardest part. We will not discuss who Beria was during his lifetime. We will tell the story of how he was eliminated after his death, or instead of it. An operation that never appeared in official records, a gunshot the country never heard, a body that vanished faster than the official version was created. This third part is not a biography, and not an analysis of accusations. It is a reconstruction of the final hours of a man whom the authorities tried not just to forget, but to erase completely. And while the first two parts answered the question, who was he? Today, for the first time, we ask another, how was he removed? And why, along with him, they tried to destroy memory itself. Let's begin. The night Beria disappeared. Moscow, June 26, 1953. Noon. Inside the Kremlin, a meeting of the Council of Ministers is underway. In 15 minutes, one of them will cease to exist. Lavrentiy Beria smiles. He is certain he controls the country. He has no idea he has already been condemned. In the corridors, officers without insignia. In their hands, pistols hidden beneath folders. The order is simple. No noise, no paperwork. A latch clicks, a cry, a gunshot. A chair hits the floor. Silence. In the official records, all of this will be described as an arrest. But some believe Beria was killed immediately. No trial, no interrogation, no right to a final word. Why was the interrogation protocol signed 6 months later? By whom? If the minister was dead on the very day of his arrest, where is his body? Why did no one witness a burial? Why do the archives contradict dates? And why are the signatures different? There are no answers, only fear and whispers in the corridors. That night, they didn't just kill a man. They killed Stalin's own fear. From that moment, the Soviet Union began living under a new law. A law of silence, where every spoken word could cost a life. The man from Tiflis. Lavrentiy Pavlovich Beria was born in March 1899 in the village of Merkuli, near Sukhumi. His father was a poor peasant. His mother, an educated woman who dreamed of giving her son proper schooling. After graduating from the city school in Sukhumi, he enrolled at the Baku Polytechnic Institute. He studied construction engineering, spoke Georgian, Russian, and Azerbaijani. He faced the early years of the revolution without carrying a gun, working as a technician while civil war raged across the Caucasus. At 19, he joined the Komsomol, later the Bolshevik Party. In Tiflis, he served in the Extraordinary Commission, the Cheka. The work within the security organs taught him to treat the value of human life with cold pragmatism. By 1924, he already headed a department of the Georgian GPU. By 1927, he was deputy head of the entire Republican Security Service. His career was built with precision and without haste. First, he eliminated his rivals in Abkhazia. Then, he turned to Tiflis. Local Chekists knew, under Beria, losing a file or a minor mistake in a report could cost one's position. On his desk lay hundreds of dossiers, on enemies, on friends, on potential replacements. He never forgot a single name and could remind someone of their wrongdoing years later. In 1929, he met Sergo Ordzhonikidze. Ordzhonikidze noticed the young administrator and introduced him to Moscow circles. Through him, Beria got access to Stalin. This acquaintance became pivotal. When nationalist conspiracies erupted in Tbilisi in 1931, Beria suppressed them without hesitation. Moscow appreciated the results, not the methods. In 1932, he was appointed head of the GPU of the entire Transcaucasian Federation. By 1938, he was already in charge of the NKVD of Georgia. When the purges began in Moscow, Beria managed to survive them unscathed. On the contrary, his people took over the vacated positions. Stalin valued the kind of executor who asked no questions and could impose fear on others. In 1938, he was summoned to the capital and became Yezhov's deputy. Just months later, Yezhov vanished, and Beria moved into his office. The course shifted. Mass arrests slowed. Case reviews began. He presented himself as a moderate reformer who saved hundreds of investigators from the very machine he now commanded. But he did not dismantle that machine. He merely oiled it and replaced some gears. War brought a new scale. The NKVD handled evacuations, rear area security, and the fight against saboteurs. Under Beria's supervision, factories were constructed deep within the country. In 1943, he was entrusted with the atomic project. The Uranium Committee, laboratories, ultra-secret facilities, all decisions passed through his signature. Within the government, he was considered the man for special assignments. Stalin used him for operations that were never meant to leave a paper trail. Among military leaders, Beria provoked disgust. Among technocrats, fear and respect. His ability to solve problems outside the rules made him indispensable. After 1949, internal shifts began. Stalin was aging, and the party anticipated a power transition. Beria initiated reforms within the security system. He reduced the categories of criminal cases, introduced control over investigations, and released certain groups of prisoners. Publicly, he spoke of relaxing the political regime. But everyone understood. No concession was ever made without calculation. Simultaneously, he accumulated compromising material on anyone who could obstruct him after Stalin's death. Files were stored separately in a secure location in Moscow. Khrushchev, Malenkov, Bulganin, all were listed there. None of them doubted those files could be opened any night. On March 5, 1953, Stalin died. The country was in shock, leadership in disarray. During the first hours of crisis, Beria appeared the most composed. He took control of Kremlin security, telephone communications, and all intelligence channels. Decisions about the funeral, appointments, access permissions, everything went through him. In the spring, he became first deputy chairman of the Council of Ministers and Minister of Internal Affairs. In his hands were the internal troops, counterintelligence, prosecution, labor camps, and state archives. No other member of the Presidium held such concentrated power. It seemed he was preparing for a new era, the era of Beria. For the first 2 months after Stalin's death, the country functioned under his directives. He ordered the release of many categories of prisoners, halted the deportation of ethnic groups, and initiated the review of major political cases. Newspapers wrote about the humanization of power. But within the leadership, panic was rising. If his influence grew any further, the others would become expendable. During those weeks, silent enemies began to surround him. Khrushchev convinced Zhukov that action was necessary. Malenkov hesitated but understood. It was either them or him. Preparations proceeded as a secret operation. No paperwork, no witnesses. Beria noticed nothing. He followed his schedule, received reports, signed orders. Everything appeared routine. Not a single sound in the corridor caused concern. Within days, everything would change. The very man who gripped the country by the throat was about to be silenced. Forever. The Kremlin conspiracy. After Stalin's death, the leadership lived in constant tension. No one understood who would become the new master of the state. Officially, power was divided. Malenkov, chairman of the Council of Ministers; Beria, his deputy and Minister of Internal Affairs; Khrushchev, first secretary of the Central Committee. In reality, it was Beria who controlled the internal troops, counterintelligence, and the entire surveillance network. Each presidium meeting unfolded under his watchful gaze. He spoke calmly, rarely raised his voice, yet even his pauses carried weight. Reports from subordinates were checked line by line. Mistakes were not forgiven. Khrushchev felt threatened. He knew that without the military, his influence was negligible. And the military were loyal to Zhukov. Zhukov still remembered the NKVD interrogations and stayed silent until he was convinced the tide was shifting. In the spring of 1953, behind-the-scenes conversations began. Unofficial meetings were held in dachas and government apartments. They discussed a single topic: how to stop Beria before he eliminated them all. Khrushchev acted cautiously. A direct accusation of conspiracy could cost him his life. He gathered support piece by piece. Yesterday's rivals suddenly became allies. By the end of May, he had enough votes to take the risk. The first test of strength came at a presidium session. Beria proposed reducing the role of party authorities in governing the republics. On the surface, a technical matter. In essence, it stripped Khrushchev of his main instrument of power. He realized there was no time left. That evening, Khrushchev, Zhukov, and several military officers met at Bulganin's apartment. The conversation was quiet. The plan was simple: eliminate Beria during a session of the Council of Ministers. Officially, an arrest. In practice, removal with physical consequences. Zhukov agreed only on the condition that the operation would be led by the military. He requested permission to deploy a tank division to the Kremlin under the pretext of training exercises. Bulganin arranged the paperwork through the Ministry of Defense. No one dared to object. The following weeks passed under the guise of preparing for a meeting on security reform. Beria suspected nothing. He believed himself too valuable for anyone to dare strike. Even the unusual number of military personnel in the Kremlin that day caused him no concern. Meanwhile, Khrushchev sounded out opinions within the military. Among the generals were those who remembered the interrogations of '49 and the loss of comrades to false accusations. These men wanted vengeance. The decisive meeting took place in the night before June 25th. Zhukov stated, "If we delay even one more day, he'll give the order first." Khrushchev remained silent for a moment, then replied, "Tomorrow." Thus was born a coup that does not exist in official archives. The signatures on the orders were ordinary, but their meaning was not. The Kremlin was preparing for an operation unknown even to the man it targeted. At 6 in the morning on June 26th, the division entered the city under the pretext of military exercises. The soldiers believed they were protecting the Council of Ministers. The officers knew they were protecting everyone except one. The sun rose over the Kremlin. An ordinary day began. Beria drove to the meeting in his black ZIS, confident and composed. He did not notice that, via another route, military vehicles were already approaching the Kremlin. By noon, everything was ready. All that remained was to open the door to the meeting room and give the signal. Within minutes, the country would lose the man who, only that morning, controlled it entirely. Operation Masquerade. The morning of June 26, 1953, began like any other. The heat had set in. Official cars moved along the empty streets of Moscow toward the Kremlin. None of the drivers knew that this day would enter history. At 10 a.m., Beria arrived at the Council of Ministers session. They were scheduled to discuss new measures for reforming the Ministry of Internal Affairs. He entered the room, greeted Malenkov, and took his seat at the long table. Nearby sat familiar faces: Khrushchev, Bulganin, Kaganovich. Everything appeared calm. Outside the meeting room, in the Kremlin corridors, officers began to appear. Officially, security, checking access protocols. In reality, an assault group led by General Moskalenko. The team was selected by Zhukov. The papers were signed by Malenkov. Beria suspected nothing. The plan was timed to the second. At first, the meeting was to proceed as usual. Malenkov opened the agenda, handed over the floor to the speakers. Time dragged on. The main objective: prevent Beria from noticing anything out of place. By 11 a.m., Khrushchev gave the signal. Malenkov interrupted the discussion and uttered a pre-rehearsed phrase: "There is an urgent matter of state importance." General Moskalenko entered the room with several officers. Beria looked up and, for the first time, sensed something was wrong. He managed to say only, "What is the meaning of this?" There was no response. The officers surrounded the table. One drew a pistol. According to one version, Beria raised his hands and said, "Don't do anything foolish." According to another, the shot came immediately. Zhukov would later claim that Beria tried to reach for his briefcase. Either way, it lasted less than a minute. Then, silence. Staff members waiting in the corridor heard a muffled noise and a stifled cry. The door opened, and a body was carried out. Malenkov announced, "The Minister of Internal Affairs has been arrested." No one asked questions. Officially, it was stated that Beria had been detained and taken to prison. Documents confirming this would appear later, in December. Only then would the verdict be issued. But no witnesses to the arrest would ever be found. General Moskalenko claimed Beria was alive and transported to the Ministry of Defense bunker. The guards insisted they saw him already dead. Serov stated that the minister had been killed on the spot. Even among those who took part, no unified version exists. Zhukov ordered the body to be removed under the label "Special Cargo." The vehicle left the Kremlin via a service gate and disappeared within the Ministry of Defense grounds. By evening, the report on the operation was on Malenkov's desk. The signatures were placed without corrections. Meanwhile, radio and newspapers portrayed everything as normal. No mention of the arrest, no hint of a coup. The country remained silent. No one realized that power had already changed hands. Khrushchev spent the rest of the day in the Kremlin, overseeing press communications. He said briefly, "Order is maintained. The country continues to work." Zhukov departed for headquarters, officially to monitor the exercises. Malenkov personally signed the orders appointing temporary acting officials in the Ministry of Internal Affairs. That evening, the transcript of the session was rewritten. Unnecessary phrases were removed and the wording was added. Arrest carried out without resistance. This version became official. A few days later, all documents related to the operation were marked top secret. That night, Moscow slept peacefully. No salutes, no alarms, no patrols. Only a handful knew that the state's history had changed in a single minute. By dawn on June 27th, the USSR was already living without the man who, only the day before, had been called the most powerful in the country. A shot to the heart of the regime. That same evening, only a narrow circle remained in the Kremlin. Khrushchev, Malenkov, Bulganin, and Zhukov gathered. They discussed one thing: how to formalize what had happened. They decided, officially, Beria was arrested, and the case was transferred to the military prosecutor's office. The main goal was to prevent the army and the security services from doubting the legality of the operation. By midnight, a telegram reached Lefortovo. Prepare a special cell. No name, no date. The duty officers guessed whom they were expecting, but did not dare to ask. The next day, an entry appeared in the logbook. Prisoner delivered. Received without incident. The signatures were forged. Those who escorted the body from the Kremlin kept silent. One driver recalled that the cargo was handed over to officers in uniforms without shoulder boards. A second vehicle drew attention away at a secondary exit. No trace was left in any official record books. Thus disappeared the man who had controlled half the state. While documents were being rewritten in Moscow, the ministries were in limbo. Beria's phones did not answer. His orders no longer came. Some subordinates waited for their chief to return and refused to believe the rumors. Others were already burning papers, cleaning out safes and taking his portrait down from the walls. Fear simply changed direction. Now people were afraid even to say his name. Meanwhile, Khrushchev demanded total control over information. No leaks. Not a single stray word to the press. Malenkov ordered the drafting of a statement about a conspiracy against the party and the state. The text was written through the night, with every phrase chosen to avoid mentioning blood. Zhukov summoned the division commanders who had taken part in the operation. They were required to give identical testimony. Beria was arrested. He did not resist. Any deviation in wording could cost them their careers. By morning, the officers could recite the version by heart. A day later, a rumor spread through Moscow. Beria was caught spying. The newspapers remained silent, but in queues and at factories, people spoke of nothing else. Some rejoiced, lived to see the end of the butcher. Others wondered. Just yesterday, they praised him for the amnesty. No one knew that the amnesty had already been revoked. The next evening, the military removed several crates of documents from the Ministry of Internal Affairs building. Malenkov's secretariat compiled an inventory, without specifying the contents. One note in the inventory read, "Special file, to be destroyed." Most of these papers were never seen again. Those days, the Kremlin functioned in a state of siege. Security was doubled, entry allowed only by special passes, private telephone lines disconnected. Every government member understood. If the conspiracy were exposed, no one would be saved. So everyone kept silent and acted as if they were confident. That same evening, Khrushchev wrote a short phrase in his notebook. The country is saved. He believed he had destroyed the threat. But he knew. There were no proofs, no witnesses, no valid protocols. Beria was still officially alive. And to keep the regime from cracking, they needed to create the illusion of justice. Within a few weeks, the military prosecutor's office would present a fictitious Beria case. It would contain testimonies, signatures, and interrogation records. Not one of the investigators who allegedly signed those papers would be found later. They would disappear just as the man whose answers they had written down. The operation ended without extra noise. No gunfire in public, No urgent radio orders. No alarms. On the evening of June 26th, Moscow sank into silence. Power had changed hands, but the country did not know it. Thus ended the day when the shot rang out not only inside the Kremlin, it tore a hole in the very system of fear that Beria had built all his life. After that, the regime could no longer be called the same. It survived, but it changed. The silence that followed the shot became a new form of rule. A corpse without a signature. Immediately after the liquidation, the cover-up operation began. It was necessary not only to conceal the fact of the killing, but also to create the appearance of a judicial process. Dozens of people took part in this, each knowing only their own small segment of the work. The first step was to formalize the arrest. In the registration logs of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, an entry was added retroactively, June 26th. It contained false initials and a case number that had previously belonged to another prisoner. The log was usually kept in black ink, but on that page the writing was in blue. Years later, archivists would note the discrepancy. That same day, a directive reached the Council of Ministers' office stating that the arrested Beria LP is to be placed under the supervision of the military prosecutor's office. The document bore no executor's signature. In the margin, a pencil note read, "By verbal order." Thus, the legend began. According to later publications, the official investigation supposedly lasted 6 months. However, no original interrogation protocols exist in the archives. Only typewritten copies have survived, produced in several different fonts. Even the names of the investigators differ from those who actually served in the prosecutor's office at the time. Historians who had access to these materials noted strange details. Some pages are dated July, others December. In certain copies, there are references to events that took place after the alleged arrest. It is as if the text was written later, adjusted to fit the required outcome. Zhukov and Serov gave testimony to a commission only after Khrushchev's death. Both claimed that Beria had been shot immediately after detention. Zhukov said, "He did not manage to say a word." Serov stated, "There was no interrogation. The body was taken away at night." Their statements matched, although the official story continued to insist there had been a trial. The burial place remains disputed to this day. One version claims the body was cremated at a test range near Kubinka. Another points to the Donskoye cemetery, where the ashes and records of high-ranking convicts were kept. A third suggests a basement at Lefortovo, where bodies were burned without reports. None of these has been confirmed by documents. In December that same year, the press published a ruling of the Supreme Court of the USSR. For treason against the motherland, espionage, and anti-state activity, citizen Beria Lavrentiy Pavlovich is sentenced to the highest measure of punishment. The ruling was dated December 23rd, the date of execution the same day. The text bore the signature of the chairman of the military collegium, who at that time was on an official trip abroad. The archival copy of the verdict was found only 30 years later. The paper shows traces where the seal had been erased, the ink blurred as if the document had been hastily dried under a lamp. In the lower right corner, there is another handwriting, presumably that of a secretariat clerk. Formally, everything appeared lawful. In essence, a legal fiction that retroactively legitimized a killing. After the verdict was published, a large-scale purge began. Beria's secretaries were arrested. The personal files of his aides were seized. Mentions of service under him disappeared from the biographical records of hundreds of NKVD employees. Even in later encyclopedias, his name ceased to appear. It was as if he had never existed. Rumors about bodies burned without identification circulated in narrow circles. Some former Interior Ministry employees claimed that the ashes were taken out at night and scattered over a river. Others said an urn was buried in an unmarked grave at the cemetery of the Donskoy Monastery. There is no proof, but one fact remains: no grave and no document confirming cremation. By the end of the year, everything was in order on paper. Files were distributed among the archives, the case materials sealed in a special folder. Only the first secretary of the Central Committee had access to it. Everyone else had to make do with the official version. From then on, the name Beria became synonymous with fear. Not a person, but a shadow on which any guilt could conveniently be pinned. His death was erased from the state's memory just as thoroughly as the traces of his life. Yet even decades later, one thing remained unchanged. No one could say where and when the story of Lavrentiy Beria truly ended. The body disappeared, the documents contradict each other, the witnesses are dead. All that remains is a country where the death of an official required more paperwork than his life ever did. Silence of the witnesses. After the arrest, a period of staged calm began. The Kremlin did not publish any official statements, only brief notes about the temporary removal of Beria from his post. Newspapers wrote about Malenkov's economic initiatives and the party's peace-loving course. It was as if the country erased the minister from its memory overnight. At presidium meetings, his surname was no longer mentioned. Documents bearing his signature were retyped, the old copies destroyed. Staff members received verbal instructions not to discuss the events of June 26th. Thus, a collective silence was born, one that replaced any investigation. In the first weeks after the operation, Zhukov kept his distance. He understood that he had been used as a tool by the politicians, but there was no way back. The army remained loyal as long as it wasn't forced to say Beria's name aloud. Any discussion of the operation was considered disclosure of state secrets. Officers signed non-disclosure agreements and remained silent until the end of their lives. Serov was tasked with overseeing what remained of the Interior Ministry apparatus. He carried out a purge among the generals who might have kept Beria's personal papers. Many were removed from their posts or transferred due to health reasons. Some were arrested, others quietly pushed into retirement without a pension. Everyone understood. It was safer to forget everything they knew. The leadership at Lefortovo was replaced. The old prison chief suddenly retired. His position was given to a man who had previously served in Khrushchev's security detail. The archival books were swapped out for new ones, previous pages cut away. Those who remembered the old entry about the delivery of prisoner Beria soon left the service. By the autumn of 1953, almost all direct witnesses had disappeared. 2 officers from Moskalenko's group died in car accidents just weeks apart. Another shot himself, leaving a short note without a date. No investigation followed. The cases were closed quietly. In the Kremlin, they chose not to attach any importance to these tragic coincidences. Employees of the Interior Ministry who had taken part in rewriting the case files were reassigned to the republics. None of them received promotions. They all knew they bore the invisible mark of having been involved in a secret operation. They could not speak. It was dangerous to complain, and pointless to try to justify themselves. Their silence became part of the mechanism that preserved the new power. Later, Zhukov tried to distance himself from the events. In conversations with officers, he repeated that he had acted by government decision. Yet, in his private letters from that time, there is irritation and anxiety. He was afraid that, sooner or later, the charge of murder would fall on him. That fear followed him to the end of his life. Khrushchev, by contrast, confidently consolidated his victory. He crafted the image of the savior from Beria's tyranny. At party plenums, he spoke about the exposed plot, though he never presented a single document. Words replaced evidence, belief replaced facts. A new mythology was being formed right before the eyes of its participants. When de-Stalinization began a few years later, the Beria theme became convenient. All the fears of the previous era were now pinned solely on him. In a single figure, they combined the evil of repression, arbitrariness, and violence. It was an easier way to cleanse the system without dismantling its foundations. Society accepted this new scheme without question. People who had served under Beria vanished from biographical directories. Their names stopped appearing in newspapers. Their faces were cut out of group photographs. The children of such employees were expelled from universities for political reasons. Even within their own families, people tried not to pronounce the surname aloud. Fear remained. It simply changed its address. In the 5 years following the coup, more than 3,000 files connected to Beria were either destroyed or classified. Some archives were sealed inside special safes without inventory numbers. The keys to them were handed personally to Khrushchev. Later, he would admit that, "Even I didn't open them, so I wouldn't know too much." Thus, silence became the new way to protect power. Those who had taken part in the liquidation received no medals, wrote no memoirs, and never mentioned that day. Each preserved their own version, but allowed no one to voice it. Out of many possible voices, only one remained. The official voice of the announcer reading the text of the verdict. Years passed. Leaders changed. But the topic of Beria remained closed. Veterans of the security organs spoke of him in whispers, as if he were still alive. No investigation was ever authorized. The archives continued to remain silent, as if they knew that silence was the only document that could be trusted. It was that silence which finally cemented the coup. No trial, no funeral, no traces. Only a silence that proved more reliable than any law. In this way, the system purged itself of witnesses, and at the same time proved fear can be killed, but it cannot be buried. The shadow in the bunker. In the summer of '53, an unnatural quiet settled over Lefortovo. Cells were being emptied, duty officers were rotated more often than usual, and the prison chief did not leave his office even at night. Rumors spread that, in one of the underground cells, a man was being held whose name could not be spoken. No one knew for certain who it was, but everyone understood. They were talking about him. Officially, Beria was awaiting trial. In reality, not a single investigator ever saw him. Everything happened outside the prison walls, perhaps even outside Moscow. When the guards were questioned later, their testimonies conflicted. Some insisted a man resembling the minister had been brought to them. Others swore no such transfer had ever occurred. A legend arose. Beria was alive, but hidden underground in a bunker of the Ministry of Defense. He was supposedly taken there on the very first night after the arrest. The entrance was guarded, with officers of the special department on duty. Orders to guard the site were given orally, without paperwork, without stamps. Shift changes occurred at night, in the dark, with the lights switched off. An old officer who served at headquarters in those days later recalled seeing a convoy of 2 cars with covered windows. One bore the Interior Ministry emblem, the other, the stars of the military department. The vehicles drove into the yard around midnight and disappeared behind heavy gates. 40 minutes later, the gates opened again. but only one car drove out. No one saw what happened to the other. There was another version. To convince everyone that a proper trial had taken place, they allegedly used a double. A man with a similar appearance was found among former prisoners released under the amnesty. He was promised life and freedom if he played the role of the minister at staged interrogations. Within a few weeks, no one ever heard of him again. There is no proof of this story, but it is too persistent to be dismissed as random fantasy. Some details that surfaced in officers' memoirs coincide. They even named a specific bunker, a facility near the garrison town of Kubinka. There, they said, existed windowless rooms used to hold special prisoners. The archives of that facility remain closed to this day. In early August, an order came from the Ministry of Defense headquarters to destroy part of the night duty logbooks. Blank lines remained in the duty roster columns. The dates jumped over several days at a time. Thus disappeared the last mentions of convoy movements on those nights. The papers were burned, the ashes removed, along with the ordinary trash. Among the military, one more strange story circulated. During night exercises near Moscow, an illuminated transport plane was seen taking off without call signs. It was said to be carrying special cargo. A few hours later, the same plane supposedly landed in Kuybyshev, where the government's reserve command center was located at the time. No records of that flight survived. If these fragments are to be believed, then the body, or the person referred to as Beria, was taken out of the capital. Why is unknown. Perhaps for interrogation without witnesses, perhaps for final disposal. The officers involved in the operation preferred not to remember. Anyone who tried to clarify the details soon lost their position or found themselves under investigation. After Khrushchev's death, some of his former aides admitted no documents confirming Beria's detention in any prison existed at all. Only a single sheet with the phrase, "held under observation." No signature, no date, no location, as if the entire story rested on an empty line. That emptiness turned out to be stronger than any proof. It allowed all versions to exist at once. For some, Beria died on the day of his arrest. For others, he lived for months underground. Perhaps both versions are half true. The man the country knew died, and the Beria kept in the bunker was only a shadow of his name. Thus a myth emerged, convenient for everyone. For the authorities, because it closed off uncomfortable questions. For the people, because it explained the disappearance without a trial. For historians, only a cold trace remained on paper, where date and signature dissolved into a gray stain. No one knows what exactly lay in the iron container taken from the headquarters that night. Some said documents, others ashes. But everyone agreed on one thing. The smell of burning paper lingered for several days. It felt like a physical reminder that even the darkest secrets are burned quickly when they belong to the living. So Beria turned into a shadow, lost between reports and rumors. A shadow that wanders through the archives for decades, never finding its place. And the more years pass, the harder it becomes to distinguish the trace of a crime from the trace of a legend. Night in the basement of the headquarters. By midsummer 1953, the situation at the top had stabilized. Khrushchev had consolidated power. Zhukov controlled the army. Malenkov formally headed the government. All three understood one thing. As long as Beria's shadow existed, there would be no peace. His name was spoken even in places where he was already gone. Military archives would later record a strange episode. On the 29th of June, a sealed convoy of 3 vehicles entered the grounds of the Ministry of Defense headquarters. according to official papers, the delivery of equipment. Eyewitnesses claimed the cargo beds were sealed, and the license plates belonged to a different unit. The convoy arrived at night and was never registered at the checkpoint. In the basement wing of the headquarters, where isolated communications rooms were located, officers of a special department were on duty. They received an order: do not leave your post and do not ask questions. Those men later disappeared from personnel lists. They were replaced by others, as if the original officers had never existed. According to the memoirs of a major general writing under a pseudonym, it was there that the final stage of the operation took place. He claimed to have seen a brief flash of light, followed by silence. After that, a metal container resembling a military safe was carried out of the basement. The container was taken to a chemical protection laboratory that housed a furnace used for eliminating evidence. This version seems horrific, yet it aligns with the leadership's behavior in the following days. Khrushchev never once referred to interrogations, although in other cases he liked to cite confessions. Malenkov signed the order for judicial review only in December, when no body remained. Thus, the trial was conducted over a man who no longer existed. In the basement of the headquarters, traces remained that could not be dismissed as accidental. Stains of a corrosive solution used for disinfection lingered on the floor. Officers who worked there later complained of a strong odor that persisted for months. The room was soon converted into a storage area and sealed. The night after the operation, Moscow was wrapped in heat. Lights burned in the Ministry of Defense building, though no one knew why. Inside, the final remnants of the Stalin era were being destroyed. Laboratory workers signed non-disclosure agreements and left the city the next day. Their names were never mentioned again. By morning, Zhukov sent Khrushchev a brief note. "Everything is done," he replied. "Understood. The prosecution will proceed." No reports, no dates, no official stamps. The meaning was clear without wording. The operation was complete, and there were no witnesses. Days later, Malenkov spoke at a closed presidium meeting. He declared that full isolation has been ensured for Beria. This phrase entered the minutes. Later, it would be used during the drafting of the verdict as proof that the defendant remained in custody. In reality, only his name was held under custody. Over the following months, arrests swept through former Interior Ministry employees. More than 500 individuals connected to Beria's apparatus were detained. They were accused of espionage, abuse of power, and subversive activities. Most received sentences without trial. Thus, the last witnesses of the basement were eliminated. By the autumn of 1953, a half-joking phrase circulated in Moscow: "Beria definitely won't be making phone calls now." No one laughed aloud. Even those who despised him understood. The disappearance of such a man could not have happened without blood. Official Ministry of Defense documents from that time contain blank lines, gaps in dates, missing entries, discrepancies in personnel rosters. Historians refer to this as holes in the paper. It is within those holes that most likely the last evidence vanished. That night in the headquarters basement became the final point of the operation. The papers that could confirm the true date of death were burned. The archives rewritten. Those who saw the container never returned to service. Only one detail survived over time: a dull metallic sound remembered by senior officers. They recalled that, at that moment, it felt as though the heavy lid of a safe had closed. Behind it remained forever the man who had mastered the politics of fear across an entire nation. And as the lid settled into place, the corridors were filled with a ringing silence that lasted long after. Thus ended the night no one ever recorded in the calendar, but whose consequences were felt by the entire country. Forged protocols. By the autumn of 1953, the investigation into Beria's case had been officially completed. The newspapers were silent, yet behind the doors of the military prosecutors' offices, quiet work was in full motion. Documents were being drafted that had never existed. Signatures were placed under interrogation protocols that had never been conducted. The first drafts of the verdict appeared in October. They were edited multiple times, each revision changing phrasing and dates. Some versions mentioned witnesses who were already dead by that time. Others included facts clearly invented to strengthen the accusations. A standard Underwood typewriter couldn't keep up with the volume of falsifications. 3 typists worked on it, unaware of what they were typing. One later recalled seeing the word interrogation without the name of any investigator. When she asked whom the documents were for, her supervisor replied, "This is a story that hasn't happened yet." The main task was to link Beria to foreign intelligence. Without that argument, the accusations looked like personal revenge. So the following phrase was inserted into the text: "Systematic espionage activities in favor of foreign powers." Which powers, not specified. The wording had to sound convincing, but require no proof. Serov and Moskalenko supervised the process personally. They ensured that document dates matched the official time frame of June to December. No page could mention events that occurred after the day of arrest. Yet errors still slipped through. One protocol accidentally stated, "Investigation completed June 27." The typewriters left different print textures, but all sheets were glued into one case file. The mismatch in fonts would later become one of the signs of forgery. Even the paper varied. Some pages were dense, others gray, from a different batch. But to the Commission at that time, the appearance mattered more than consistency. The case simply needed to look legal. December approached, and still there was no actual defendant. No witnesses, no photographs, no identification. So a fake statement on the mental state of the detainee was prepared, signed by an unknown doctor. This document explained why the accused did not attend the sessions. He allegedly could not participate in the trial due to health reasons. Everything seemed neat until the signature of the chairman of the Military Collegium of the Supreme Court was required. The general was away on a trip. His signature was placed by the secretariat clerk, who later received an apartment and a promotion. 2 years later, he disappeared from official records. Presumably deceased, but no exact date of death could be found. The verdict was printed in 3 copies. One went to the archive, the second to the government, the third to the press. But it never reached publication. Khrushchev forbade printing the full text. The newspapers published only a brief note. Former Minister of Internal Affairs Beria has been declared an enemy of the people and sentenced to the highest measure of punishment. Traces of edits in red pencil survived in the archives. Several phrases were struck out. Violated the law on state secrets, attempted to escape. These lines were removed to avoid raising questions. No escape, no secrecy. Everything had to look straightforward. Crime and punishment. When the documents were finalized, they were distributed across ministries. Each received a copy of the verdict, labeled "to be stored forever." But a few months later, by instruction of the Central Committee, all copies were destroyed. Only one remained in the safe of the main military prosecutor's office. It still bears a smeared ink stain, as if someone tried to erase the date. These protocols became the foundation of the legend, repeated over decades. With them, the new leadership cemented the coup, turning murder into a lawful court ruling a legal fiction replaced reality. And since then, any attempt to question those events has been met with the same reply. There are documents. Only over time did it become clear that the documents are dead too. The ink has faded, the signatures have bled, the paper cracks at the slightest touch. Yet even now, those sheets remain locked away, as if they might come alive. Because within them lies the most important truth. The truth was not killed together with Beria. It was killed instead of him. Khrushchev and his lie. After Beria's elimination, power in the Soviet Union went to those who had feared even speaking his name just days earlier. Khrushchev moved quickly. He understood that a coup can only be secured by one thing: the correct version of events. History had to become a weapon, not evidence. The first step was a public campaign. Newspapers began publishing articles about Beria's conspiracy against the party. Each issue was backed by verdict excerpts, although nobody ever saw the full text. Readers were told about enemy connections, double dealings, espionage. Facts were unnecessary. Repetition was enough. At Presidium meetings, Khrushchev spoke confidently. He claimed to have saved the country from a new dictator, that he had prevented the disintegration of the USSR. His colleagues nodded. Arguing meant questioning their own role in the operation. Thus, a collective crime turned into a collective legend. In December 1953, when the fabricated verdict was released, Khrushchev spoke before the party leadership. His archived statement reads, "Beriaism is rot, hidden at the heart of the state. We have cut it out with a burning knife." These words became the foundation of new ideology. From that moment on, Beria was not just an enemy, but the embodiment of everything the regime wished to distance itself from. Malenkov didn't object. The role of chairman of the Council of Ministers suited him. Bulganin oversaw the army. Zhukov stayed in the shadows. Khrushchev, exploiting their caution, gradually pushed all of them aside. First Malenkov, then the military. Within 2 years, he became the only voice speaking on behalf of the party. Meanwhile, the myth of the conspiracy gained new details. Textbooks described an attempted coup, and films portrayed Beria as ruthless. It looked convincing because no one could compare it to reality. The archives remained closed, the witnesses dead or intimidated. History became a stage set that no one tried to dismantle. For the people, the new version was comfortable. It explained everything: repression, fear, denunciations, prisons. It allowed them to believe that one man was to blame, not the system itself. Khrushchev distributed forgiveness as if he had the right. He invited citizens to forget those they feared yesterday and thank those in power today. When the campaign to expose Stalin's personality cult began, Beria's name resurfaced. It was now used as a mirror reflecting the sins of the past. Every mention included new details, many fabricated, some borrowed from unrelated cases. The priority was to keep the flames alive, so nobody asked the main question: who killed Beria? In the late 1950s, Khrushchev liked to say that the country has been cleared of poison. By poison, he meant not only the minister, but the entire era in which that minister was indispensable. But together with the poison, documents, names, and facts disappeared. The purge of memory became a continuation of the purge of people. And that is what made the myth stronger than the truth. Even after Khrushchev's removal, the archives remained sealed. The new leadership preferred silence. Any attempt to restore the authentic history threatened established order. Even in the 1970s, Raising the question of Beria's death was considered dangerous. Safer to repeat the official version, memorized and convenient. Thus, Khrushchev's lie became the foundation of the Thaw. Behind the facade of exposure, he concealed the core crime, the killing of his own comrade. In exchange for calm, the country was given a myth of salvation. A myth that millions believed because there was no alternative. But truth did not disappear. It hid in the contradictions. Signatures written in the wrong ink, entries without dates, protocols without witnesses. These small details never fit the official narrative. They waited for their moment, and one day will speak when fear of the archives finally fades. The story of Beria is not merely the chronicle of one man's end. It is a mirror in which power saw its own reflection. Khrushchev won, but paid with the same weapons he used to kill: lies, falsification, fear. Thus, the bullet that stopped Beria's breath continued its path, now inside the system, destroying it from within. Ash without a grave. After the verdict was announced, Beria's name was deliberately erased. It disappeared from newspapers, textbooks, and party records. In offices of former MVD officials, photographs hung with fragments cut out where he had once stood. Even in official directories, a blank space remained between the names of Zhukov and Krugloff. His burial site has never been confirmed. In December 1953, a discreet nighttime cremation was carried out at the Donskoye Cemetery for an unidentified subject. The entry in the log was sloppy, missing an urn number. The following page was torn out. The next recorded cremation appears 3 days later. Crematorium employees later recalled that night. A special cargo arrived under armed escort. Other versions exist. According to one, the remains were destroyed immediately after the operation, in the furnace of a chemical disposal facility. Another claims that the ashes were taken near Kubinka and buried on a military testing ground, without a mark, without a cross. The archives where cremation records might have been stored were destroyed during a reorganization in the 1960s. Only indirect traces survive: transport receipts and an order to dispose of classified material. Those involved in the burial disappeared from official employment lists by spring of the following year. One of them, a technician named Shiryayev, reportedly told a neighbor he had carried ashes without a name. A week later, he was transferred to another city, then vanished from all records. No file, no relatives, no trace. Khrushchev soon ordered all mentions of Beria removed from state registries. His awards were annulled, his cases closed, his property nationalized. The apartment on Malaya Nikitskaya was split into 3 government units. Only books on engineering and architecture remained. Everything else was removed or burned. Such thorough erasure was not used even for enemies of the state. The goal was not silence, it was non-existence. No signature, no document, no object was to testify that this man once ruled the country. The dust of the archives absorbed him faster than soil absorbs ashes. When historians in the 1960s requested access to Beria's case files, they received the response: not for release. Even in sealed collections, his name was replaced by initials. Only in the late 1980s did the first cautious, fragmented, contradictory publications appear. By then, many documents had been altered or reorganized. Truth dissolved into stratified layers of official stories. In 1968, it was rumored that someone anonymously visited Donskoye Cemetery and left red carnations on an unmarked grave. A guard recalled a man in a military uniform without insignia. An hour later, the flowers were removed, the soil freshly turned. No name was ever added to the plaque. Over the decades, many attempted to pinpoint the location. Archivists cross-referenced cremation logs, studied inventory ledgers. Every time, they met blank fields and non-existent numbers, as if someone had planned the erasure in advance. Today, Moscow has a Lavrentiy Street, but it honors a saint, not a minister. There are archives holding his signature on thousands of orders, yet not one document confirming his death. No body, no grave, no date, only a whisper. It ended that night, when no one was meant to know. Thus ended the story of a man who once held the country by the throat. He vanished as silently as the people he ordered to disappear. The system he built swallowed its creator and slammed the lid of the safe shut. No space was allowed for memory, as if he had never been born. And yet the dead do not fade while someone remembers them. Beria's name remains in historians' discussions, in sterile reports, in half-spoken recollections. Every new researcher opening an archive descends into that same basement, where the air smells of paper, metal, and old dust. The echo of footsteps still lingers, and it feels as if the shadow of the man without a grave walks beside them, silently watching anyone who dares speak the truth. Who pulled the trigger? More than 70 years have passed since the coup. The official version remains unchanged: arrest, trial, verdict. But no document confirms that events unfolded that way. Too many inconsistencies, too few witnesses. Historians still debate who gave the first command: Zhukov, Serov, Khrushchev himself? Each became prominent afterward, yet none accepted responsibility. All referred to the government's decision, a decision that never appeared on paper. Some claim Zhukov fired the shot, coldly, without hesitation. Others say it was one of Moskalenko's officers. There's even a theory that the order to shoot was given beforehand and executed without words. The truth drowned in fear and deception. The bullet became a symbol of the era. That bullet pierced not only a man's chest, it ruptured the system built by his own hands. With him died the order structured around fear, and was born a new lie structured around oblivion. Beria's death marked the boundary where power learned to kill not its enemies, but truth. After that night, the country exhaled. Telegrams about the conspiracy were replaced by reports of harvests, speeches on agricultural reform. Newspapers filled with smiling workers, cheerful kolkhoz women. Silence after the gunshot became the backdrop of a new era. But beneath that silence remained those who remembered. The officers who signed forged protocols. The typists who retyped the verdict. The witnesses of silent convoys with covered plates. Each lived with the weight of something that could never be spoken. Khrushchev died convinced history would forgive him. Zhukov died in isolation, forsaken by the system he had saved. The documents decayed, the paper yellowed, yet the myth endured. The myth that a single killing could save a nation from chaos. Today, Beria's name still provokes debate. Some see a butcher, others a manager who held the state together. The truth lies somewhere between those extremes, in that very room where the chair crashed from the gunshot. The room is gone, but the sound of its fall lives on in the minds of those who seek truth. Remove ideology, and one fact remains. Power in the Soviet Union did not change at a party congress or at an election. It changed with the click of a trigger. The country was reborn from that shot, fired into the heart of the regime. History does not know the exact moment of Lavrentiy Beria's death, but it knows precisely the birth of the new era, June 26, 1953. That night, the Soviet Union stopped being Stalin's and became Khrushchev's. That night, one man vanished, and with him, the belief that fear is eternal. The truth of those final minutes will never appear in textbooks, not because it is unknown, but because it is feared. Every power is born from its own act of violence, and the one who pulled the trigger that night may well have known that one day someone would pull it for him